joining us now to talk about that and all the things going on in the NBA. You can hear him on the Front Office Show, wherever you get podcasts, as well as read his work at the Celtics blog. It is Keith Smith. Keith, how are you this afternoon, man?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Good. You were a regular on my show in Milwaukee. Then I came out here and I found out you were a friend of the program here, mutual friends. And now we're all here in the same place. One big happy family. Keith, good to talk to you about the Kings for the first time.
Yeah, it's a very small NBA world we live in.
It sure is. Before we get into the Kings and the offseason, I saw you tweet that you were going to speak about Kevin Durant on your podcast because, well, you're legally obligated to at this point. But is that why people are still talking about Kevin Durant? Is it much ado about nothing because the market has gone completely quiet? Or is there some fire where this Celtic smoke has been puffing from for a little bit now?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I think we're in full on to what I call NB August. Mm-hmm. Like we're just normally we're completely content dry and there's nothing going on at this time of year. But I think right now there is a little bit of stuff because we have Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, Donovan Mitchell, Russell Westbrook, major stars, some of them in major markets where it is kind of we're still waiting to see what's going to happen with those guys. So anytime there's even the slightest bit of news, it's something we're all going to jump on and cover and try to figure out what's happening.
Do you think that there are that, you know, whether it's Kevin Durant or Donovan Mitchell or Kyrie Irving, whichever one is the first to happen, do you think that we're about to see dominoes start to fall in the NBA? Or do you think, as I've theorized, I saw Bobby Portis say this yesterday, that the Rudy Gobert trade kind of broke the NBA trade market in terms of the value that they got for Rudy Gobert. So now the Nets are looking at everybody and going, if that's what Rudy Gobert is worth, then what exactly is Kevin Durant worth? And on down the line, Donovan Mitchell, Kyrie Irving, any other star that's on the market right now, you're looking for a Rudy Gobert type of package in return at the very least.
I really do think that threw everything out of whack. I think Kevin Durant, coming out with his trade request hours before the free agent negotiating period was set to open, was one thing that I think kind of threw people off. Then you come into the next part is then, within hours of that, Rudy Gobert gets traded for, 5 players and a bunch of first-round picks and, a whole bunch of stuff. And that turns into the Nets then probably feel like, well, Kevin Durant is a better player than Rudy Gobert, so we can't possibly take less. So then that kind of throws everything out of whack, and that turns into, all right, well, Boston can give us Jaylen Brown and stuff and picks without then gutting their roster so much that then they're not very good. And that's a huge challenge where I think you've got a lot of these teams, what becomes is we could maybe try to trade for Kevin Durant, but what we're going to end up doing is we're going to gut so much of our roster, then what was the point of trading for him? Because now we're left with not enough to put a good team on the floor.
Do you think the Celtics put together a package that satisfies the Nets, and we're talking about Kevin Durant and Jason Tatum or some variation of that coming up in a couple of months?
I don't think so. I don't think Boston in the end is going to meet the Nets asking price. If they're not willing to do Jaylen Brown and picks and maybe one role player, I just can't see Boston saying, yeah, let's go, because the Celtics are looking at it as, hey, we're in game 6 of the NBA Finals, and then we added Malcolm Brogdon and Danilo Gallinari without giving up a single rotation player. We're really set up for success here. We've got a couple more trade exceptions we could use if a hole comes up during the season that we have to fill and those kind of things. So I think Boston's looking at it and saying, yeah, we need the guys to take us like a step further. We don't need to go at a guy who might take us 8 steps over the line when 1 step is all that's necessary. And why are we going to, do this for a guy who, a year from now might be like, yeah, I don't really want to play here either.
Does anybody meet the asking price?
It's going to be tough. History tells me someone will, and that the Nets will come down enough that'll make it happen, because just anytime we get in these positions, it eventually gets done. I think back to Carmelo Anthony when he got traded from the Denver Nuggets to the New York Knicks. It was, well, no one is going to be able to do that trade because no one will pay that price for what the Nuggets want, what the Nuggets want. And then eventually the Nuggets came down a little bit, the Knicks came up a little bit, and it got done. So I do think that there is, the potential we see something happen. I just think right now everybody's kind of in a staring contest saying, all right, who's going to blink first?
Talking with Keith Smith. You can catch him on the Front Office podcast as well as the Celtics blog, where you can find his written work. And I know you and your partner on the Front Office show, Trevor Lane, both like the Sacramento Kings offseason, what they were able to accomplish these last couple of months. Keith, let's start before we get into the players. What did you think of the Mike Brown hiring as head coach?
Yeah, I thought it was a good hiring for them. I am a little worried that we're hearing so much of, we have a coach who emphasizes defense. He's going to fix our defense. And that all sounds good. But if you don't give them some defensive players to fix it with, that doesn't tend to go very well. But I do think what we will see out of them at a bare minimum is they'll be more organized scheme-wise. They'll be more connected defensively. I don't think we'll see those massive breakdowns that we've seen plague this team at times in the past, where it turns into it's almost running a layup line to the rim, because all you had to do was run a couple screens and then they were all already broken because they didn't know how to connect through the switches and those things. I do think Mike Brown will have a lot more organized, and then I think then it becomes an issue of, all right, we need to upgrade the defensive talent, but we're there scheme-wise, which is an important first step.
What did you think of the Keegan Murray draft pick when they made it?
Home run. I had him in the first. Yeah, I had him as my top guy outside of the top three. Outside of Banchero, Holmgren, and Smith, who I thought had separated them, I had Keegan Murray as the next guy. I actually waffled right before the draft, and I said, all right, I'm going to put Jaden Ivey in a tier with him. But I for most of the time, I had Keegan Murray by himself. And I had him a lot closer to those first three than I did to anybody else behind him. I just think the guy can play. He can rebound. He can shoot. He can score. He can score off the dribble. He can score as a stationary shooter. I think there's a ton of offensive talent, especially where the NBA game is headed. Everybody wants these big wings who can create their own look, and Keegan Murray can do that. And he's also somebody then you can't kind of say, well, when he's off ball, we can help off him and not pay attention, because he's going to be a really good shooter.
What do you think with that in mind of the style that they and a lot of teams around the NBA are trying to play now, the additions of Monk and Herter and how they fit with Sabonis and De'Aaron Fox and what they're trying to do there?
Huge. We've been saying, it feels like for years, like, you got to get more shooting around De'Aaron Fox. And I think the hope was, right, Buddy Hield would be that guy and they'd be this dynamic backcourt moving forward, but there just wasn't enough there, I think, especially on the defensive end. And there also wasn't a lot of size. Kevin Herter has great size. I think he will start. I think they're going to start Sabonis, Barnes, Murray, Herter, and Fox. And then Monk will come off the bench as kind of the super six man, and he'll probably be in some of the closing lineups and things like that. But that's where I think they're headed. I think what they have in Herter is a guy who can make shots. He's also a really good passer. It got overshadowed, especially last year, as Trae Young took on an even bigger amount of the usage in the Hawks offense. But this guy can pass. He can move the ball. Fox can obviously create and move the ball. Sabonis is one of the better passing bigs in the entire league. I think you're going to have a team that is going to put together an offense that's going to be a lot of fun to watch, a lot of ball player movement. And then you're going to have guys like Herter and Monk on the backside of that, knocking down jumpers along with Murray, Barnes. And Sabonis isn't a bad jump shooter for a big guy.
Can Mike Brown make him play defense?
That's going to be the challenge. They're probably going to have to get by more on scheme, at least right now, than they are defensive talent. They're probably their two best defenders are Davion Mitchell and maybe Rashawn Holmes. And those two guys are probably going to be coming off the bench, which that's not necessarily the end of the world. But as long as you're giving good effort, you can scheme your way into some stuff. And Mike Brown's been a really good defensive coach. He's been with really good defensive teams in the past. I think you'll see them adopt some of the Warriors stuff that they do. They'll probably put Harrison Barnes in some positions where they're going to ask him to do some of the stuff that they do with Draymond as far as switch, come out and hedge, vary coverages. He's not Draymond Green, but he can cover some of the same type of stuff schematically. So I think that's what we're going to see come together for them in this season. That's why this makes this a really important training camp and all of that.
Keith, playoffs?
That's the tricky part. This is where, and I said this on our show, on the Front Office show, they can be in a position with the Kings where they can be a much better team, but it may not show up in the standings because The really hard part is you have a lot of really good teams in the West. The Pelicans are going to be good. You've got all the teams that were in the playoffs already last year. So my worry for the Kings is, are they going to be able to get good enough to catch some of the teams that they need to catch? So some of the teams like, New Orleans, Memphis, Dallas, as LA comes, the Lakers, that is, come back to the pack. They're going to be able to catch those teams before they get caught from behind, because Houston, Oklahoma City, they're building something there. But I think if things go right, they're going to be in that mix. I don't know that they'll crack the top 6 in the assured playoff spot, but I think they can get into, the 7, 8, 9, 10 play-in range. And then, as we've seen in the play-in tournament, almost anything can happen, in that, especially if you're in that 7-8 game. You only have to win one game, and then you're in. And I think they have an opportunity to pull that off for sure.
That's Keith Smith. Check out the Front Office Show. Also, the Celtics blog is where you can find his work. Keith, really good catching up, man, and hearing your voice after being a regular on my Milwaukee show. Glad we're going to keep doing it. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely happy to do it. Thank you for having me.
There's Keith Smith joining me on the Cattles and Ramie show here on Sactown Sports 1140. Keith isn't the only one who really liked this Kings